We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. My name is Ralph Tycho. I'm kind of the co-host, but the real co-hosts are Tim Haller. Jimmy, how are you, sir?
Good to hear you, Ralph. I'm doing well. How are you, my friend?
Happy holidays. I'm glad you are. The other co-host of Substantiality, let's put it that way. Patrick Quinlan, how are you?
Rocking the free world. Great to be with you guys. Happy New Year.
Rocking the free world.
And let's get this perfectly straight right now, Ralph. I've always been Patrick's right-hand man. He's never been mine. He used to bark orders to me, and I would jump. I'd ask him how high, and I would go and run and do the chores that he did not want to do in that clubhouse.
Well, they couldn't have been too many of those because Patrick is an industrious young man, and that work ethic, it carries over into life, makes you very organized, and you do have the work ethic, which it can't be beat. They tell me I had that once for an hour, and thank God it wore off. It was 1972. I digress. Let's talk and introduce the first guest of 2017, and ironically, a member of the Giant family, the extended Giant family. John Leonoudakis, and as much as I tried, I'm sure I didn't pronounce it 100% correctly.
You fucked it up, Ralph. You fucked it up, okay?
Well,
it's Leonoudakis.
That's better.
I fucked it up too.
You got it, boy. Both of us, now we're a tandem. Patrick, you want to take a shot at it?
Sure, yeah. Leonoudakis.
All right.
Well, that's good to be here. Thank you.
That's your looking, Patrick. How's that? You didn't even take a sip. God. Woo. All right, John. You're famous in my eyes because you came on these airways a while back and brought one of my boyhood heroes, who wasn't a baseball player, he was a baseball author. Arnold Hano wrote the wonderful book, A Day in the Bleachers, and it was about the first game of the World Series in 1994, and Willie Mays made a catch, and more than that, Willie Mays made a throw. And before we go any further, tell me how Arnold is doing, John. And he's over 90 years old, sharp as a tack when I spoke with him. Hope he's still healthy and hanging tough.
He is. I talked to him last week, and he'll be 95 this year. And he's doing well, and as you say, he's got all of his marbles. And he's always great to talk with, especially to talk anything about baseball history. He sure has seen a lot of it.
It was one of the highlights of my doing podcast radio. I want you to know that. You were nice enough
Excellent.
to set it up. And,
well, they had a big. It was very nice. Arnold and I went back to the Hall of Fame at the end of September. Our film was selected to be shown for their annual film festival. But they were very nice. They made a big deal about Arnold. We had a very long Q&A afterwards, and then they took us into a back room where there was some really great old artifacts and relics, and both of us got to actually get our hands on a bat that belonged to Lou Gehrig. So it was very special, very nice.
Yeah, stuff like that to a baseball fan. I've Campy Campaneris bat that he signed for me, a broken bat, but nonetheless,
nice.
I just every once in a while I can touch it. Just Castro died, I went and touched Campy's bat. It's a long story, but stuff like that wears off if you're a crazy baseball fan, and I I know I qualify. And when I say crazy, you don't have to be crazy. You just have to be passionate. And
yeah, well, I hope some of that rubbed off on my hands too.
Yeah, Lou Gehrig, for crying out loud. Wow. Very nice. I did not know that the Hall of Fame did allow physically touching displays and what have you. Was this?
Well, we had to wear gloves. And this was stuff that wasn't. They sort of hauled us out of the back archives. It wasn't stuff that was specifically on display. They pulled a few artifacts together. They had Tom Seaver's cleats, Kennesaw Mountain Landis' chair. It was all kind of in a back office. It was nice.
Wow.
That's
one of my goals
That's
to
really
get to the Hall of Fame. You know, the Hall of Fame, the year the Giants had an All-Star back about 10 years ago, the Hall of Fame came out with a display at the Convention Center in San Francisco, and it was basically around former Giants, Christy Mathewson, Willie McCovey, and this had other players as well. And it was just like being at the Hall of Fame. They set it up so professionally. I have some wonderful pictures that I'll repost of that. It was I did it on a blog, and it was Muhammad coming to the mountain and something like that instead of the mountain coming to Muhammad. But it was spiritual. It wasn't the Hall of Fame, but you walk and you stand next to enclosed in plastic enclosure, but nonetheless 2 feet from you, Ty Cobb's uniform, this, that, and the other thing. It was incredibly inspiring. So
they do a nice job on their touring exhibits. Right now, the Hall of Fame's photographic touring exhibit is a little pop-up museum that Dodger Stadium is hosting for the next couple of months, and it's fantastic.
Wonderful. Maybe I'll make a trip down to L.A. and I can see Timmy along the way.
There you go.
Well, do I have to go into Dodger Stadium? Is that a requirement?
No, it's on the periphery.
Okay, good. Because I want to stay as far clear as that place as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to melt if I go anywhere not Dodger Stadium.
There are some good memories you have, Timmy. We've talked about this, of Dodger Stadium when your dad played.
That's very true.
Tell me seriously about some of the good memories that you have, not so much of Dodger Stadium, but of your dad playing with the Dodgers.
Oh, you know, it was such a different kind of atmosphere, too, in that era, in that time, as it still is, really. 2 different cities, 2 different cultures, really. Los Angeles, at that time, the Dodgers drew, mediocrely. They didn't overwhelmingly fill the stands back in the late 60s, early 70s. But the type of patron, a lot of Hollywood types, Doris Day, Walter Matthau. So on any given night, you would see fame and celebrity. But the for the most part, the stands were not always packed. And just like it is today, and you hear about it and you witness it on television, or if you actually go to a game in L.A., not everybody settled into their seats until around the top of the 3rd inning. And then it seems like everybody trickles out around the 7th. So, it's a much different culture. And that's one thing that I recall. All the families and wives sat in one particular section. It was section 105. It was just the second tier of seats just above the Dodgers dugout. A little bit closer between, home plate and the dugout. And we all sat together. The families would sit together. And all the kids. So I have great memories of section 105, which, you'll be interested to know my brother and I are working on a play called Section 105. And it was about our years in L.A. with some of, Dad's, teammates and their kids, most specifically the Brewer kids. Jim Brewer was a left-handed relief pitcher, great screwball pitcher. he and Dad were very close, very good friends. And our experiences, at that age, those years at Dodger Stadium. One little anecdote I'll just throw in here and we'll move on with John is just, I remember probably as clearly as any other memory, is after we would go out and work out with the guys, we'd shag and put our uniforms on and go out and run around the field and shag and whatever. We would come in and shower and then get dressed and go and meet our moms to go sit in section 105. Well, the Dodgers had a very expansive home dugout and clubhouse. And in that clubhouse, they had actually two separate locker rooms or areas in which guys would dress. One was completely empty, and that was for special events or Hollywood stars or whatever. So that's where the kids would go to get all dressed and ready to go upstairs, or even, before we put our uniforms on in there. But then the shower room was so huge, and it was just perfect, pristine white tile, and it just seemed like a row for 100 feet of sinks of vanities and mirrors, and it was bright and well lit. And we, with the four of us, my brother and I, Mark Brewer and Scott, we called Scott Dana Brewer, we would play soap hockey in the showers. It would be more like soccer, though, with the bar of soap, and around the perimeter of that shower was a trough where the water would drain off and, flow off. This is how massive the shower was. And here are these four punk, naked kids running around kicking soap, trying to score a goal into the shower trough. So there you go. How's that story for you?
Yeah, that's a nice, good memory. Timmy, I want to ask Patrick, before we get to John, his memory of the Dodgers coming in to Candlestick. But before that, you and I have not talked about your brother. And I want to know whether or not he too played pro ball, if he played in high school, or what were his skills? He was older than you. Was he a catcher, an infielder? What?
My brother and I are like night and day. He's a wonderful man, just extremely intelligent, funny, warm, loving guy. But our interests, growing up, were so different and so diverse. We were polarized, really. He was far more interested in academia, and I was a pretty good student, but he was brilliant. And then, aside from that, he enjoyed sports like cross country and tennis. So he was a little bit more of it against himself, without that team competitiveness, really, as you would find in baseball or basketball, what I participated in anyway. So, my brother and I, when we were younger, we were 4 years apart, so there was a separation of years that we never attended the same junior high. We didn't go to high school together, and he's older than I am, so he was off to college when I just became a freshman in high school. So when we were young, we weren't that close, we weren't that, and we had different interests. Of course, I was a lot more of that, pigpen type, come in just filthy dirty from playing out in the sandlot all day, and he would have been home with my mom, baking cookies or reading a book. And that's the diversity between the two of us.
Right.
He was not into he loves baseball. He loves the game. He just didn't, he didn't have any interest in it as far as playing. And then later, as he got older, got through college, he went to work for the Giants, went to work for Bob Lurie and his real estate company. And my brother really became very successful in asset trading. He was a mortgage banking, guru for a company in Minnesota called Cargill International. Now, my brother will be 58 on the 12th of January, and he retired when he was 42 years old. So he's been, he pulled the pin, 16 years ago. Unfortunately, about 5 years ago, he was stricken with a bacterial infection in his lower back, and that infection ate away the spinal cord, and it rendered him paraplegic. So today my brother is in a wheelchair, and he will be unless there's some miraculous sort of medical thing. But my brother and I are probably closer today than we've ever been, and a lot of that has to do with geographics. He's living here in the desert now. I talk to him on a daily basis, and I probably see him once or twice a week. So that to me is very fulfilling, and I'm glad that he's, that we're so close. Dad's passing in 2004 brought us even closer, I think, after a period of bewilderment after Dad's passing, but it brought us closer together. And then my mom is, she's aging and having her physical and medical difficulties, and I think that's kind of rallied us together a little bit, the three of us, to become even closer. So that's a little synopsis there.
I'm glad to hear you becoming the home team in that respect. Yet I'm sorry to hear about your brother having to go through what he's going through. That's terrible. And if you all check it out, in general, there are so many infections that are transmitted in hospitals. Go in for one thing or another, and they come out with all kinds of secondary problems. So that's become a big problem in the medical community, and just the way it is. I'm sorry, Timmy. Quickly, before we get to John Patrick, give us some Dodger memories of when the Dodgers came into the Candlestick, if you would.
Well, number one, they hated it. So, because it was just a terrible place to play the sport. And, them playing in the Southern California in great weather, the pristine Dodger Stadium, the Dodger Way, and Walter Alston, great ownership. I mean, they were the elite. They really were. So when they came in the Candlestick, it's like all those guys knew about the rivalry. As soon as you signed a Dodger contract, the rivalry begins and that process. So they come to Candlestick, and it's like, yeah, we're here 3 days, and we're playing 2 nights in a day game, and the fans were drunk and ready to go by first pitch, basically. So as soon as they make that entrance into the field there at the right field corner, they're airing it out, all the profanities. It's just like New York and Philadelphia. So they always locked in even more when they played the Giants and their focus because of that treatment, the ballpark, the rivalry, everything. So they had better teams in the 70s, and they just hated playing there, and they just, would just lock in their focus. And, when you get Ron Say, who's got more career jacks against the Giants, I think, anybody, and he was a Giant killer, that all those guys, they just loved coming in and beating the Giants because the fans really got to them, and they just said, okay, we're going to take it out on your team and beat your butt, and they just couldn't wait to get out of there because there's nothing you can do as soon as it's game time, nothing you do about the Arctic chill and the wind and all that stuff, and you just try to, beat them. So
right.
I just remember all those guys.
And you mentioned Ron Say.
Yeah.
They had such a terrific infield of Say, Russell, Lopes, and Garvey that they must have been together for 10, 12 years.
Yeah, I think 9+ or something like that. So.
Yeah, 9+
and they're all
years
of draft picks. Yeah.
Right, and that's what I admired. It was like being growing up in New York and not rooting for the Yankees, but admiring them. And they were, you had the legend of Sandy anytime, you mentioned Sandy to a Brooklyn kid, even if he's not a Giant fan, even, if he's not a Dodger fan, wow, Sandy Koufax, that kind of thing. So they had the aura, and they had Vin, who retired. That's going to change the face of baseball forever. And so those dems were the days. John, would you start off and tell us a little bit about what sticks in your mind about what actually made you famous? The documentary you did on the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 that was took place right at the beginning of the World Series, the World Series, as my grandmother would have said. And you happened to have your camera and you were all set up and ready to go.
Yeah, that story actually starts back in the 70s. I worked at Candlestick from 1970 to 75 in the parking lots. So, of course, was very familiar with the area and the locale, and, of course, was a big Giants fan going back to 1964. But, of course, I was too young to appreciate the 62 World Series, so when they got in 89, my brother got me a ticket. I came up from Los Angeles, and, hey, it's my first World Series, so, I wanted to document it properly, so I got my dad's gigantic VHS camcorder. It was a Magnavox. It was $800 back then, which is a lot of money. But it was a great camera. I had my still camera with me, and I was just, I wanted to document the one time I was going to the World Series and, did some color coverage in the parking lot, interviewing some people, getting some of the pageantry and so forth. I didn't bring the video camera inside. I didn't think they'd let me. At the end of the day, I found out that they would have, but I did have my still camera. And and as you say, the rest is left up to, beg your pardon, to history. And so I put that documentary together a few years ago, and it's done well.
May I ask you this? Because I know where I was standing on the porch on 59th Street, Shattuck and Telegraph, and I can remember the thought that went through my head when things started a shaking, and believe me, it was an earthquake. And did you know initially that it was an earthquake, or did?
Oh, without question. Without question. I was in line for a hot dog, and certainly felt it. I think being on that concrete slab insulated it a little bit in that we didn't really feel the magnitude that you would have otherwise. Excuse me. And where I was right underneath that part of the. I was on the mezzanine level, and above me was the big lip of the stadium. And people were still coming. The game hadn't yet started because it was about 5:04. The game was going to start at 5:35. And there were a lot of people coming in, and felt the shaking around. What's the first thing we do, right? Where are you going to go? Where are you going to hide to protect yourself from falling debris? But there was nowhere to go. Everything was just packed. It was like, that thing comes down, it's over. And so you grin and bear it, you white knuckle it until it was over. But it was pretty scary.
Yeah, I can well imagine. I recently found out because the giant CanBR went off the air very quickly. But from talking to, I don't remember who I talked to about this. But it was Bill King, who was the voice of the A's, and his system stayed on the air, and he became the kind of the go-to guy in the Bay Area for what was happening.
Oh, you're thinking of Al, what's his name, for ABC. He sort of became the on-the-scene reporter.
Al Michaels.
Al Michaels, right. Al Michaels.
And he actually won an Emmy because of that reporting.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. But
he was a local, too. I mean, he kind of, he did his teaching in Bay Area sports. He worked for the Giants for a while and doing play-by-play and other things. He did sports on, I can't remember what channel, but I think he sort of, got his roots in broadcasting in the Bay Area, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're correct.
That sounds very correct, yes.
A couple years with Cincinnati, then the Giants, and then ABC and all that.
Now, how long did it take you to put together the documentary after the incident? incident?
Well, I kind of did two versions. I did a very early, raw, primitive version. That was probably at least a good 10 years later. But I really went to work on it with great effort, in time for the 25th anniversary. I mean, actually rented Candlestick out to shoot there. We had a situation occur where we kind of rescued some stranded fans, and a really nice guy from the Atlanta area. He and his father were part owner of the Birmingham Barons, and they would go to the World Series every year, and this was their annual trip. But they got stranded because they got dropped off by a cab, and so we gave them a ride. So we wanted to, recreate that, not really recreate, but sort of meet again. We hadn't seen each other in 25 years, so we met again right on this very spot in the parking lot in the stadium there. And then, of course, my brother and I, we went inside. We sat in our very seats. This was a year before the stadium was torn down. So we get to sit in our very seats and really kind of reminisce and remember what it was like that particular night back on, what was it, October the 17th, I believe.
Wow. Got to be chilling memories when you got together with the folks from Atlanta. That wow, whose idea was that? That's some great producing to put that together. That's what it's all about. That was tremendous.
Well, all the stories I try to make when I produce my baseball documentaries and media, baseball really is kind of the backdrop. It's the human stories, and I think that's one of the key things about baseball is the human side of the game. So that's what I tend to focus on as opposed to the statistics and so forth, because we've all heard that forever. And, the current project I'm involved with, The Sweet Spot, A Treasury of Baseball Stories, really speaks to those stories from people all over the spectrum of baseball. We're talking to former players and coaches. We're talking to clubbies. We had a great interview with Mike Murphy. This is a guy that's been with one team for 60 years. And he doesn't do many interviews, as you know, but he was kind enough to share with us. And there are so many people like Mike in the game of baseball. We interviewed a bat boy, a guy who used to work for the Yankees for a couple of years and during the Don Mattingly era. And these are stories that, people just don't typically hear, but they're fascinating. A lot of people tell me, I don't even like baseball, but I like these stories that you talk about because I can relate to them on a human level.
Well, one story I was looking at your highlight film. You have Mudcat Grant, who to me was not only a pitcher, he was a poet, a philosopher, and one of the all-time, one of the 20-game winners that made the black players that won 20 games, and he must be in his 80s, and he sounds like he is totally with it, and he's got his stuff together. And that's the one thing about what I do, what you do. We talk to players and people who are just, well into their 80s, and it's an inspiration for we young geezers. I can still consider myself a young geezer. I want to be an old geezer, but I want to have what these people seem to have. And they seem to have their seichel, their marbles, whatever it is that their guile, their enthusiasm, their passion goes on. And I think a lot of that is because of baseball. It's a common denominator in baseball where you think about it and you talk about it and you analyze it, and it keeps your mind young.
Well, Mudcat is 83. He's got a little bit of trouble with arthritis, but otherwise he's sharp as a tack and the nicest guy you'd ever meet. And, he played in the 50s, he played in the 60s, he played in the 70s. He dealt with the ravages of racism. He told me, it was unbelievable that there were managers in baseball in the 50s who didn't want to see a black pitcher get to 20 wins. Brooks Lawrence, when he was pitching for the Cincinnati Reds, had 19 wins, and he basically got parked because the manager of that team said, I'll be darned if a black guy is going to win 20 games on my watch. And what happens? They came in second place. They lost out by 2 games. So it was amazing that racism trumped their whole reason for being there, which was to win games and win championships. And he said that there were white catchers that would intentionally cross him up. Mudcat was telling me this. These are just some of the things that they had to deal with. And I consider myself a student of the game. I had not heard that, managers were sandbagging their black pitchers as they were nearing 20 victories in the 50s.
Can you tell me was that Hutchinson that did that?
No,
Dave
I believe, I'm trying to remember who that was. It might have been Bertie Tebbetts. It might have been Bertie Tebbetts. I'm not 100% sure.
I want to say Dave Bristol.
It was definitely not Fred Hutchinson.
Dave Bristol.
Worked for the Giants for a while, if I'm not mistaken. Did you?
Dave Bristol, yeah, you managed for a little while. That's right.
That's right. And it might have been Bristol managing in that time period in Cincinnati.
Well, that was the 60s. That would be too early for Dave Bristol.
It's an atrocity if it's true, and I'm not here to argue the fact that these kinds of things were going on, but it's really a sad commentary actually when you hear these stories that these guys were being looked upon in that manner. It breaks my heart, really. It's a sad state of affairs.
Well, it was 60 years ago. It was certainly a different time. Racism was somewhat institutionalized throughout America. I mean, unfortunately, we still see a fair amount of that today. We just don't see it to that extent of it, at least in the game of baseball. One of the interviews we did with a reporter named Ron Rappaport, fine reporter for the LA Times, and he had one of those last interviews with Jackie Robinson, and before Jackie died in 1972, and Jackie came out, was invited to do some of the introductory ceremonies for the World Series that year, and he said, "I will not be happy until I look over in that third base coaching box and I see a black face." And what was it? It wasn't until 77 until we had our first black manager in Frank Robinson for the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I've mentioned this before on the show. I was the Topps representative in the 80s and 90s. The guy with $5 checks. And one day in Oregon, a fellow by the name of Darrell Thomas managed again, and this is a short A league in the Northwest League, a league that introduces to baseball, high school players, college baseball. A lot of them get their start in the short A league when they're first drafted. Well, Darrell Thomas that weekend managed against a fellow by I think his name is Ron Turner. He was a coach later for the Philadelphia Phillies. And it was the first time in it was like 1988 or 9. It was the first time that two blacks, African Americans, managed against each other in the history of organized baseball. When Frank Robinson came up, there were no other, was a manager, there were no other managers. He and Wills never crossed paths managing against each other. And all these years later, it took in the low minors in organized ball for two blacks to manage against each other. So when you mentioned that the racism that was so overt back in the 50s, 60s, and what, it might be a little more covert at this point, but it's still there. There's no question.
Oh, absolutely, and it's in a way it's a lot more insidious. But
yeah,
with respect to Mudcat,
and it's not because we haven't. You know what gets me? We haven't learned. We haven't learned about what happens when a group of folks are registered. You know how that works, and how that worked in Europe when
and to the Japanese Americans during World War II.
Well, Italians, Jews, everybody want to talk about any minority over the years, and yet we still go on with the polarizing craziness that just makes you shake your head and wonder, and not just baseball. We're talking about the world.
Well, when you talk about Mudcat Grant, you are talking about one of the great pitchers of the 60s, and after a fine career as a starter, he became a very good relief pitcher. But one of the great stories that Mudcat shared with us was that, the black ball players would sometimes get threatening phone calls at the hotels while they were on the road. So-and-so, you better not show up or you're going to get shot. So they wouldn't answer the phone. They wouldn't talk to people on the phone. But the phone kept ringing one day for Mudcat. He was playing in Detroit in '61, and he refused to answer the phone. There was a knock on the door, and it was actually the Secret Service.
Wonderful.
And President Kennedy wanted to have breakfast with Mudcat Grant to talk about the racial situation in the United States. And he developed friendship with President Kennedy, and it's a marvelous story.
Yeah, great story, warm story about Kennedy, about the fact that he cared enough to find out the pulse of the nation. And, that's a wonderful one. John, because it's a Giant show, would you tell us some Mike Murphy stories without giving away the entire shtick?
Well, sure. Well, Mike actually started out, he was a bat boy for the San Francisco Seals. And all he knew was minor league baseball. And Mike was saying, when the Seals were ending in '57, he was told, hey, the Giants are coming in next year, Mike. And he said, who are they? He had no idea who the New York Giants were. But he got the opportunity to be a bat boy. And I think a lot of the same people were still involved with the team. So, he just kind of kept going right along, working with the team as a bat boy and working his way up as an assistant equipment manager and becoming equipment manager. And he said one day, I think Bill Rigney played a joke on him, which was pretty funny. He said, Murph, we got a big Irish kid coming in tomorrow. I want you to take care of him when he gets here. Oh, really? What's his name? McCovey.
I knew that.
So he expected to see a big, tall, white kid the next day with red hair maybe, and there was Willie McCovey. But Murph told us he's had this lifelong friendship with Willie Mays. Willie Mays has almost been kind of like a father figure to him. And Murph is a wonderful, genuine person, and he had many great insights and stories to share about what it was like to play at Seal Stadium. He said it was a marvelous place. And then, of course, all of the experiences of taking care of the team on the road as well as at Candlestick Park.
And all the firsts that he got to see. First home run, first this, first that.
62 World Series.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if I would, just kind of piggyback on this, John and Patrick and Ralph. Murph and I are still extremely close to this day. I consider him not an uncle, much, an older brother to me. He is, personally probably one of my favorite people of all time. And we still talk on a weekly basis. We check in on how everybody's doing as far as our own families are concerned and people close to us. And of all the years that I've known Mike Murphy, very rarely have we sat down and talked about baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the kind of genuineness Murph has as far as what type of guy he is. The things that he's witnessed and experienced could fill, volumes of books. Everything that he's done in terms of his career, speaking baseball, is just enormous. It's huge.
And I think he's one of the most...
I know Mike Murphy, the guy, and
yeah.
Mike Murphy, the guy, far exceeds, to me, anything that he's ever witnessed or done or seen or who all the stories that he has. I get to know him as a guy, just a regular guy. Kind of like I said, my brother or my uncle or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, Mike Murphy is probably the sweetest man one could ever meet.
When I posted on Facebook that I had interviewed Murph, I shared a picture of us together, and one of my Facebook friends, quote unquote, is Sudden Sam McDowell, great pitcher for the Indians and later for the Giants. But when I posted that I had met with Mike and interviewed him, Sam McDowell wrote in saying, Murphy, is the greatest guy, period.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And, people that would say the same thing.
The kind of guy that Murph is, he avails himself to every guy that ever walked into that clubhouse to play for the Giants. Murph would do whatever it took to make their lives easier as ball players. Of course, he was the equipment manager. He was the clubhouse manager. But he was so much more than that. There were times when he was a psychiatrist or a shoulder to talk to, that backroom counselor. Mike Murphy is one in a million. I mean, there'll never be another Murph. And
you're right. You're absolutely right.
And he is the man. And there's so many stories that I have of him around the baseball fields and spring training and everything. And you talk about the most consistent, level-headed, spot-on guy, it's Mike Murphy. I mean, the guy is an incredible person. Just incredible.
He's roundly loved.
And everybody knows him. He knows everybody, and one of his favorite lines is, I know nothing. I don't know nothing, because of all the things that he's been able to be privy to, he's the guy that you're never going to get any real information from, even though he was right there in the middle of it.
Well,
no, he doesn't tell stories out of school.
Sign what stays in the club, what you hear in the clubhouse, what you see in the clubhouse, stays in the clubhouse. He probably figuratively and literally nailed that sucker to the wall.
He did. He absolutely did. And but just as a man, Mike Murphy, I never met anybody like him in my life. He's part of our family, as I know he is with the Davenports and the McCormicks and the list goes on. Adam Finn, it's just everybody. He's touched every single guy that has played for the San Francisco Giants, not to mention any visitors that came through, too. And everybody knows who he is. And he's the most down-to-earth guy you'll ever meet.
Absolutely right. And dyed-in-the-wool, old-fashioned San Franciscan.
Oh.
Born and raised, from what I understand.
Yeah, I think you grew up in the Excelsior district.
Yes, he did. And in the off season, Murph worked for the sheriff's department. I want to say over in Millbrae or San Bruno area. So he would go out and serve papers and do stuff for different, law enforcement agencies there and participate in issuing warrants and doing things for the judges. And he's a well-rounded fellow. Let's just say that.
Or maybe they did some process serving on me. I can't remember.
They couldn't find you, Ralph. You were hanging out with Jack Kerouac.
They could have found me if they wanted me. If they cared enough, they would have found me. But they never did. They never did. And I got through it. Give me a Murphy story that you remember, John, if you will, that he told.
I think one of the interesting things was meeting presidents. I believe he met Gerald Ford. I believe he met Reagan. I believe he met Bush. So he talked about, those guys coming into the clubhouse and having the chance to meet them and talk with them. And, this is a guy, as Tim was saying, so many people have come to that clubhouse, princes to paupers and everything in between. And, Murph is just the same guy, friendly, helpful. What can I do to help you enjoy your stay here with us? And I loved his reminiscences of Seal Stadium because he worked there before the Giants came, and he talked about the marvelous smells in the area, the aroma of the beer being made, mixing with the dough being made by Stempel's Donuts next door, along with the Hostess Cakes factories right there. He said the smell was just intoxicating.
Oh.
And a beautiful area of San Francisco, too. Right.
Yeah, and the seats, I think, were all painted kind of an emerald green. It was a beautiful, small ballpark, and unfortunately, it was just one of those old parks where it didn't have the parking requirements that all of the owners were looking for, and that's how Candlestick got picked, because they could have a boatload of parking out there, because America was big into the automobile at that point, and that really drove where they ended up.
No parking for Kezar, and the 49ers ended up going to Candlestick. And
yeah.
Kezar was much the same, in the same setting.
Yeah, very much. A beautiful neighborhood, facility, and, it just couldn't hold the crowds and the cars.
Right. I'm going to ask you all this. Was there a big interaction between the 49ers and the Giants? Did they didn't really compete against each other for fans, although the overall ticket budget for the year is what it is for families. Were they on good terms relatively over the years?
The only thing
Who are you asking that question?
You guys talk.
The memories I have, I think that they were strained relationships because they were sharing the same facility. And this is just personal opinion too. When you're a professional or a major level athlete, there are egos that are flying around. And both those organizations through the years have had great players. There were times, I think, that there might have been a level of resentment that they were sharing the same stadium. I know that when the Giants stadium was over, the Niners would sort of take things over, but they were they were adjacent right to the clubhouse in their own locker room, very close. Patrick would be able to identify that a little bit better.
Yep.
But I think that's for the most part. I think that at times, things got a little, I wouldn't say heated, but, it was almost like you're on our stage, and, of course, unfortunately they didn't have separate ballparks to play in, and they had to endure that sort of thing. I think that the 49ers, were, as the Giants were, very happy when the new ballpark was built for the Giants, that, everything just kind of at Candlestick became football.
Right.
And it was a big deal when they put in those stands out in right center field, the mobile stands that would pull out and tear up the ball field. And, when I would go and work out in the wintertime, it was all football. Everything was painted out and the stands were out, and all we would do is really run out on run laps around or whatever. And, it was just a completely different atmosphere. I'll tell you one thing, the weather was a lot better in the fall and the winter than it was in the summer and spring.
Oh, you better believe it.
The Niners had a whole lot of better weather, than the Giants ever did.
Well, don't forget.
Well, the players hated it because they enclosed it in 70, and then it became AstroTurf for 7 years, and the Giants hated it. That AstroTurf was just absolutely, it was concrete, Bobby, all those guys. They just hated it.
I remember doing a commercial with Willie Miller of the Los Angeles Rams in the late 70s, and he talked about how much they hated playing on the AstroTurf field at Candlestick. They called it Candle Rock because it was so hard.
Barely.
But
it was the parking lot.
But the things that people forget about is that first of all, San Francisco, first and foremost, has always been a baseball town, regardless of Joe Montana and the great success of the Niners. All you had to do compare it to, right, is how many people showed up for the first Giants World Championship compared to the first 49ers championship. But all during the 60s, football was the redheaded stepchild. It really didn't start to take root with people as the number one sport really until the early 70s. So it was all Giants up to that point. And the 49ers were not very good until about 1972. They had that big year where they lost to Dallas in the NFC Championship.
Yeah, John Brody. Yeah.
Brody, yeah. Right, Brody.
You know, they had those teams in the 60s. They had really good offense, and but they couldn't stop anybody. But yeah, then they both had to share the field. And I worked at the Stick for both games. We saw both sets of fans and who would come out there. And you know, yes, the weather was better in September and October, but November and December were terrible weather for Niner games. So it was cold and it was rainy then too. Maybe more so than the Giants had in terms of, you know, at least in terms of rain and so forth during the middle of the season.
Oh yeah, and then the city owned it and all the politics with the city and all those demands and how that there's certain things that the Giants hated about that relationship and the Niners' relationship with the city. We're going to do this and we're going to do that and all this, you know, all the politics going with that. I mean, it just wasn't.
And then there were those tumultuous years when the Giants were trying to get the money to get the stadium built and getting the votes, and they were turned down 2 or 3 different times,
right,
and came so very close to moving. It is such a pleasure to see them locked into a gem of a stadium in a gem of a city where they and ironically, the 49ers are no longer there after all these years. I don't think that's good for the sporting world, but they're playing in the peninsula
And you won't hear people calling that stadium a gem of a stadium. The one that they play in Santa Clara, compared to
That's a joke. It's a joke.
It's a completely different. It's a whole different organization. It's a whole different atmosphere. I don't even feel like the 49ers are part of San Francisco.
Yeah.
They're not even a San Francisco team. I consider the San Jose Sharks more of a Bay Area team than I do the 49ers.
Wait, 5-time Super Bowl champion and you move? Willie Brown was still in office. We would have that down. Would have been at the Stick property. Would have been fine. It's tragic. That's tragic.
It is.
You know, because all my friends, old school, they're not season ticket holders anymore because they can't afford it. They're not going to drive down there. Are you kidding me?
Okay. John, before we go, and time is getting short, I wanted to compliment your project, this interview project, because it's not just interviews like we have podcast interviews, and it's not television. It's a combination of a documentary style and the interviews, and the photography is absolutely incredibly well done. It's a new venue. I can't describe it. It's not like anything that's out there, and your creativeness is terrific. And I wish you a lot of luck with the venue.
Well, thank you. If I can just explain what it is very, very briefly. This is the first new streaming television channel that's dedicated to baseball, and it's debuting on 3 major streaming venues, Amazon, Roku, and Vimeo on demand. And people can check us out at our website, www.thesweetspot.tv. All the information is there, who we've been interviewing, and these are less interviews than they are conversations. And we do a heck of a lot of research before we get out there and talk with these folks. But these are people all across the spectrum of the baseball world. I'm sure, you know, Tim and Pat are very familiar with a lot of people across the strata of baseball who really make up the world of baseball. And these are the people that weave the tapestry of baseball in America. And that's our objective, is to take the pulse of the game in the 21st century all across the spectrum of baseball, to leave this as a historical document to people 50 years from now, 100 years from now. What was it really like? What was Mudcat Grant's thoughts like? Or Tiny Felder when he played for the Giants? Or Doug McWilliams, who was the Rembrandt of Topps baseball photographers? Or artist Mark Ulrichsen, how did he use baseball as a muse? All of these things have meaning not just to baseball but to the American experience.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Privileged to have you here. What a
My pleasure.
What a nice kickoff. Pardon me?
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, yes. It's a big kickoff to our 2017 season. It's Giants baseball, past, present, and future. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho. Tim Haller is the co-host, along with Patrick Quinlan, and our esteemed guest is, you pronounce it, Timmy.
John Leonoudakis.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to get fined. I don't want to have any fines. I'm just going to say John McGillicuddy.
There you go.
That sounds good. You can be Tikachinsky for a day. You can't pronounce that either.
I've been called many things. It's fine.
Thank you. Please come back again soon, John.
John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love you, Patrick.
I love you, Timmy. Hey, get better. Take care of that cough, bro.
That wasn't me. That was our esteemed guest.
Yeah, sorry about that, fellas.
That's okay. Hey,
I thought you guys were going to blame me, and I had one or two in there over the course of my career, but it wasn't me tonight, surprisingly. But John, please do take care of your cold. And
thank you.
We will be back next week, same channel, same bat station, or whatever the heck it's called. But thank you, guys. It's fun, bleeding giant, black and orange.
No doubt.
Okay.
Yep.
See you guys next week. Fans out there, keep on keeping on. And thank you for the support over the year. See ya.
Be good. Be good.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Did you hit the stop button, Ralph? All right. Take care, everybody.